Over and over again in Jesus' teachings, he takes the expectations that we have about what life should be like, and he turns those expectations on its head. And so we read about how the first shall be last, and the greatest in the kingdom are the least of these, and all of these sorts of things where the things that we would say are going to happen, the exact opposite is going to happen. And where the way we understand the world, Jesus says, is actually the opposite of the way that we normally think of. And these Beatitudes are a perfect example of that. Blessed are the poor. Whoever thought that? Blessed are the hungry. Whoever would have thought that it would be blessed to be hungry? Blessed are those who cry and weep and mourn. Who would have ever thought that? We do not identify those folks as being blessed, do we? Rather, the folks for whom the woes are pronounced in our reading, those are the ones that we think of as blessed. And here again, Jesus is turning our world topsy-turvy and saying the things that we think are normal are not normal at all. We live in a broken world where things are not as they should be, where we're very far away from that prayer that we just prayed, where we ask God, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. In the passage that we just heard, Jesus challenges everything that people think is normal and flips it upside down. Remember what he says, the poor, the hungry, those who are weeping are blessed. And the rich, those who are full, those who are laughing, woe to you. We shouldn't let the familiarity of Jesus' words lull us into forgetting how shocking these words are. Each statement is a jolt of reality in our twisted world. Things as they are, says Jesus, are not normal. They should not just simply be accepted. They should be resisted. Okay, so that's established. The world as we know it is upside down. Christ is the one who's trying to turn it right side up. Even though when he's doing that, it feels like upside down to us because we're so used to the upside down, right? The world is not as we see it. And as followers of Jesus, we need to stop accepting things as they are and open ourselves to radically different ways of looking at and living in the world. So what are we supposed to make out of these difficult sayings of Jesus? I must tell you that as I pondered these sayings of Jesus throughout this past week, as I prepared for the service, I'm still not sure exactly what to make of the things that Jesus says here. In particular, I was perplexed when Jesus makes the simple but mind-blowing statement that the poor are blessed. I know that some people want to spiritualize Jesus' words. They want to forget this version of the Beatitudes and focus on Matthew's version, which seems to spiritualize it, where it says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Do you hear the difference? Blessed are the poor, rather than blessed are the poor in spirit. You know, and those of us who are trying to find a way to understand this, and especially those of us who are used to living in an environment where poverty is there, but not something we particularly have to deal with, we find comfort in the attempt to spiritualize this saying of Jesus. We think that it kind of absolves us from really wrestling with what it means to say, blessed are the poor. I know that some folks want to, as I say, spiritualize Jesus' words, that they want to forget Jesus' statement, simple statement, blessed are the poor. Some will argue that Jesus was talking about spiritual poverty rather than actual physical poverty. Some will try to turn the poor into saints, which is true of some poor folks, but certainly not all. Some will use Jesus' words as a signal that we don't need to try to alleviate poverty, since, after all, doesn't Jesus say that the poor are blessed? And why do we need to get them out of this blessed situation that they are in? Jesus' words are often used to sentimentalize the plight of the poor, to minimize the multi-layered suffering that they experience every day. But I don't think that's what Jesus is saying. I'm not sure exactly what he is saying, but I don't believe that that's what it is. At least in Luke's version. He says, blessed are the poor with no qualifications whatsoever. And in fact, when he says poor, he is talking about the poorest of the poor. That's what the Greek word used in this passage is referring to. You know, a few weeks ago we talked about the word love and how in the New Testament there are 3 different Greek words that get translated for our one word love, right? It's the same with poor. Our one English word poor, there's several Greek words which talk about different kinds of poor. And this particular word that is used here in this passage refers to the poorest of the poor. This is talking about folks who are destitute. In fact, that could be a better translation of this. Blessed are the destitute. He's talking about people who have nothing. They don't own any possessions. They don't have any place to really stay. They don't have enough food to eat. They don't have a job. They don't have prospects for a job. These are the folks who are on the streets begging for the essentials of life. Another way of putting it is to say that if we know someone with less than we have, we are not the poor that Jesus is talking about in this passage. I met up with an old friend in New York City a couple of weeks ago, and as we were on our way to walking towards Central Park, it was a reasonably cold day, not so cold that it was super uncomfortable to walk around if you had proper clothing. But as we were walking there, I happened to glimpse a woman who was lying on the ground by a stoplight. And so many people were walking to and from and hardly paying any attention to her whatsoever. But I caught sight of her, and I couldn't help but notice how somehow in her prone position as she was lying there with a single blanket to ward off the winter cold, somehow she was able to hold out a can to receive whatever alms people would give to her. And she really looked like she was dying. She was not so much shivering as she was quaking with deep tremors, and it was very difficult to look at her. So I gave her some money, and we moved along, but I haven't been able to shake the image of that woman and the desperation that she was in that I saw that afternoon. And especially as I think about this passage, when Jesus says that the poor are blessed, all I can think of is that woman that I saw. What does it mean to say she is blessed? What does it mean to say that the kingdom of heaven belongs to her? What does Jesus really mean? Like I said, most of what I've ever heard from commentators trying to explain this passage has felt inadequate. But at the same time, I do not pretend to have any deeper insight into what Jesus is talking about. When he says that the poor are blessed, all I can do is take his word for it, and hopefully someday I'll try to be able to better understand what he means when he says that. But for me, that's the bottom line. I don't understand it, but I'm going to have to take it at face value when Jesus says that in some way the poor are blessed. For me, that's the bottom line. And like I said, in Jesus' world, where the least are the greatest, where the poor are higher up in the ladder in God's eyes, this is what Jesus is saying. I shared a few weeks ago about how some theologians speak about the fact that not just Jesus, but all of Scripture have what is called a preferential option for the poor. Over and over again in the Hebrew Scriptures, we're told that God hears the cry of the poor, that He is near to the brokenhearted, and that He saves the crushed in spirit. And so it is that we see this theme again in Jesus' words from our gospel lesson, that God has His eye on the poor, on the hungry, on those who weep, and that correspondingly, woe to those who are rich, woe to those whose bellies are full and who are laughing now, for they are on shaky ground. Judgment means that God takes sides and that God is concerned with justice, that those who are being ground down by the realities of life are of a greater and a different level of concern in God's eyes than those who are turning the wheels, that are doing the grinding. Gustavo Gutierrez, who's a Peruvian priest that many see as the founding voice of Latin American liberation theology, talks about this preferential option for the poor as a bias that God holds. I know this is not easy for those of us who think, oh, well, God's all fair and everybody looked at equally. No, according to the Scriptures, especially through the lens of liberation theology, God has a bias for the poor. It doesn't mean He hates other people, but He has a bias for the poor. Gutierrez writes, God has a preferential love for the poor, not because they are necessarily better than others, morally or religiously, but simply because they are poor and living in an inhuman situation that is contrary to God's will. So maybe one way of understanding what Jesus means when He says, blessed are the poor, is that the poor are blessed by God. In other words, they are favored by God, and that's just the way it is in this unbent world that God asks us to live into. And so if the poor are blessed and favored in God's eyes, then it only stands to reason that they should be held high up in our eyes as well, that the Church of Jesus Christ should also operate on the basis of a preferential option for the poor. But that's not something that is self-evident for many of us, and I think particularly in this country. In our bent world, even the church is at times altogether too impressed with the high and the mighty. Our bias is towards the powerful because of the fact that the powerful can help us get what we want. I know that when we talk about being in ministry to the world around us, one of the issues is that being in ministry costs us money. I can remember one time, years ago in my early ministry, one financial secretary, Steve would never do this, our financial secretary, but he came up to me, the financial secretary, and he said, you know, this new person that came to our church today, you really ought to pay attention to that person. And while he didn't say it in so many words, obviously, what had happened was he had seen the offering. And this fellow had put in a generous gift. And so, of course, I would want to cater to this fellow and make sure that he was never going to tell me that about anyone else who came in, but because this fellow could help us, he wanted me to pay attention. And that's kind of the way that we are in the world, isn't it? We pay attention to people who have something to offer us. We pay attention to people who are well off. We pay attention to people who are wealthy and powerful. Amen? I mean, I don't see any reality television shows that follow the plight of poor folk. Instead, the folks that we are told we need to keep up with are folks who the only thing about them that is noteworthy is how wealthy they are. They are famous for being famous. And these are the folks that we pay attention to. And these are the folks that we want to hang around with. I don't know about you, but I have to fight the tendency within myself to hang around with the beautiful people. And not spend my time with folks who maybe smell a little different or don't have anything. I'll admit that. And so the world is telling us that the people that we need to pay attention to are folks who might be able to help us in some way. We want to hang around them hoping that in some way, some of that power, some of that money will just rub off. And Jesus is saying, you're wasting your time. They're building on a shaky foundation. There's only one way for those folks to go, and that's down. And their day is coming. They may be flying high and mighty right now. But you just wait and see. The folks that we need to pay attention to, the folks we need to learn from, the folks that we need to be in solidarity with, according to Jesus, are the blessed ones. The ones that God says are blessed. The poor. Jesus seems to be saying that, especially in our celebrity-obsessed world, the people we elevate as being worthy of our attention, the people whose lifestyles we want to know all about, the people who get cast in reality shows are not worthy of our attention. We have a preference for the wealthy and the attractive and the powerful. But Jesus says instead, the people we should be focusing on, the people we should be drawn to, the people we should be trying to learn from and understand, the people we should be trying to find common ground with are the poor. Now here's the thing. One of the most damaging aspects of poverty is social isolation. A lot of times we don't necessarily think about that, but all too often poor people receive messages that they are really nobodies, that they don't really count, that in the vast scheme of things they are takers rather than givers, that they are somehow less than, that they are not desirable, and are almost seen as if they're not fully human. And if you can imagine living your life, I know I can't, but if you can try to imagine living your life when you are given those signals and those messages over and over and over again, so that on top of being hungry, on top of not having a place to stay, on top of being cold and miserable, you have to fight against this notion that says, I don't account and mean much for anybody or anything. See, poverty works on so many different levels beyond just the lack of material things and food and places to live. What if the Church of Jesus Christ decided that we were going to live in this topsy-turvy definition of reality that Jesus talks about? What if we decided to take Jesus' words to heart? What if we started to see the poor as blessed and favored? What if we wanted to decide that we stopped wanting to make the poor our objects of our pity and started to see them as people that are of value, of sacred worth, people we want to be with, people whose humanity we recognize and cherish, people who, gosh, maybe even have good news to share with us. Well, right here in our own church, when I ask myself what would that look like, right here in our own church, there are lots of ways, I'm so proud to say that lots of ways we are finding out what that might look like. For me, one of the places where I see glimpses of things being turned right side up, according to Jesus' version, is in our community meals. A lot of you know our church partners with a couple of local agencies to provide dinners on Tuesdays and Thursdays of each week. And over again, I have seen people who have arrived at our dinners not only hungry for food, but hungry for companionship, hungry for our community, feeling alone and isolated. I've seen them find that in these gatherings. It's a spiritual thing that goes on Tuesdays and Thursday nights. Let me tell you. You know, we're limited in terms of some of the things that we can do. We are partners with folks that are not, agencies that are not explicitly Christian. We get some funding from the government, and so they tell us, well, you can't require people to say a prayer. You can't, and that's, I understand that people are frustrated with that, but let me tell you, and I encourage you to come on a Tuesday or Thursday night, but let me tell you that we're feeding not just hungry bodies, we're feeding. So I still remember a woman who I sat down with. She had come to a couple of, this was her maybe second or third meal, and she said, I come in here and I feel peace. Maybe this is the only time in her life where she really feels like she can just relax. We don't ask any questions when folks come in to meet. They come for all kinds of reasons, but she was hungry. Food and body and soul. And souls are being fed. And guess what? It's not just the guests whose souls are being fed. Shirley can tell you, Rosemary can tell you, our souls who are there are getting fed. And we're learning. And maybe, we hang around rich people hoping some of the riches will rub off on us. Well, we're finding as we hang around with poor folk, some of their blessedness is rubbing off on us, even if we don't understand what that means, what Jesus says. Blessed are the poor. I want to close with a story that is told by a fellow named Tony Campolo. Anybody here heard of Tony Campolo? He's a Baptist preacher. We don't hold that against him, right? And he taught for many years at a Christian college called Eastern College, and he was a sociology professor, but he's also just an incredible preacher. And I want to warn you before I tell the story. He talks about a lot of things that other preachers just won't go there. And for that reason, he's beloved by many and disliked by a whole lot of others. Kind of like Jesus. Anyway, he has done over the years a lot of work in Haiti, and an organization that he heads up has 75 schools in Haiti that they run, and he goes there regularly to check out what they're doing there. And this one particular time, he was there checking out the schools, and then he was on his way to the Holiday Inn in Port-au-Prince, where he always would stay on the night before he would be flying back to the States, where he'd wash up and get ready to go back home. And as he was walking into the hotel this one particular time, three young girls, probably 14, 15 years old, approached him, and one of them said, "For $10, I'll let you do whatever you want to do." And she looked at him, she said, "You know what I mean?" And he said, yeah, I know what you mean. And then he said, "Well, how about, and stay with me on this, brothers and sisters, how much would it take for you to come and be with me all night?" She said, "Oh, $30. And then he said, "Well, how about you?" One of the other girls, "How much would it cost? Would $30 do that for you?" And she said, "Yes." And then he went to the third one. He says, how about you? "If I give you $30, will you stay with me in my room all night?" And they said, "Yes." He says, "Okay, come up, meet me up. Here's my room number. Meet me up there in 10 minutes. And he went right to the front desk of the hotel. He says, I want every Disney movie that you have. Bring it up to my room. And does the kitchen, do they still make banana splits? And they said, yeah, we still make. He said, okay, I want 4 bananas, the biggest bananas, and as much ice cream as you can put on these 4 banana splits. Bring them up to my room. And the 3 girls came up. And for one night at least, they got to be little girls again. They just watched Disney movies and ate banana splits, and when the time was right, they just fell to sleep in their bed, in the beds. And Tony Campolo thought, my gosh, nothing's changed. Tomorrow they'll go back and, it'll be right back to that life that I've got to go back home. And there will be filthy Johns who will come and run roughshod over them. And it'll just keep going. Did what I do, does it even matter? And then finally he came to the understanding that, yes, of course, we need to do all that we can to alleviate this kind of horrific abuse and suffering and taking advantage of some of the most vulnerable people in some of the poorest countries, but also here in our own country. But for that night at least, these girls were able to be kids again. We're not going to solve everything, but all at once. But minute by minute, day by day, for a few hours at least, we may be able to be part of the way that God blesses folks who we can't understand what it means to say that they are blessed. If we as individuals and we as a church are not engaged in ministry with the poor, we have to ask ourselves, how carefully have we read Jesus' words? Bishop Tutu from South Africa once said, he said, every church ought to be able to get a letter of recommendation from the poor in their community. Well, we're on our way, brothers and sisters, and I'm glad that we do what we do. There's still work for us to do before we live into what it means to say, blessed are the poor. Amen. Amen.